Hey everybody, it's Unique Jordan, owner of A Unique Perspective, and today I just want us to sit down and have a real honest conversation. So can I kick it? Can I kick it? Yes, you can. Can I kick it? Can I kick it? Hey, 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 hey. All right, my bad. I love dance breaks. But I want to, talk about just how us as Black people are moving. We are progressing. We are, really, really taking more pride in acknowledging our successes and, again, wearing that dignity on our backs. It's a beautiful thing to see. A lot of us are trying to work through these generational traumas, baby, because yes, it is prevalent. Again, it is still reverberating throughout generations, right? And we know about all of them, from slavery, Jim Crow, marginalization, sharecropping, black codes, redlining. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. It's exhausting, right? But then I got to thinking. I was like, but wait a minute. How many of us know the stories of our great grandparents, our grandparents, and more intimately, our parents? Do you know your parents' story? What was their childhood like? Did they move around a lot? What were their dreams and aspirations before you came on the planet? These are all valid questions. How can we work through generational traumas and we don't even know the traumas that exist within our own family system? So I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. Yes. Some of us fall within two categories. One category is that we just simply haven't asked, so we don't know. Another category is we've asked, but we've been met with rejection by our parents to not give that information to us. There are so many consequences to not knowing your parents' stories, and we're going to go through some of them today, okay? So one of the consequences of not knowing our parents' story is that we only see them through the parent and child lens. And we all know that they had a whole life before us. But what does that look like? How did they cope with different things? How did they move? How did they evolve, right? I think sometimes with the parent-child lens that, lends room for bias. But they're so much more of an individual than just our parents. So it's important to know their story, right? Another consequence of not knowing our parents' story is that we lack connectedness. We talk all the time about how we want to build a legacy and, how we want to make it better for our kids and our kids' kids and, all those things are great. But I think it's important to, again, know the framework of the legacy that was before you, right? So that you can either enhance, make some improvements, do some tweaks, or, hey, you know what I mean? Be the one to break that thing up in terms of the unhealthiness. But it's important that you know where the work needs to be done. And we all know that racism did not land on our planet yesterday. Racism was definitely a whole entire thing during their time. During their time, they lost a lot of their historic, public figures that were making those changes and doing things for us, as a community. So there's some grief and loss associated with that. But again, how did they navigate, oppressive, systemic platforms? How did they move within that? It's important to know. It's also important to think about the fact that trauma exists outside of racism. So there's all kinds of trauma that exists within our communities. And so, generally with trauma, it has some impacts. Different consequences of trauma is lack of intimacy, right? I hear a lot of times that, a lot of us weren't hugged. We didn't receive affection as a kid. Trauma can also impact, again, our mood. So depression, anxiety, that can lead to substance use, hypervigilance, all these kinds of things, right? How did that show up in their body? How did they cope with it? How did they move within those spaces if trauma outside of racism was experienced? One of the biggest consequences in terms of not knowing our parents' story is that we are now susceptible to repeating history. If you don't know what you're predisposed to, how can you avoid it? What preventative measures can you do if you don't even know what you're trying to prevent, right? Yes, it's important to know these things, right? So, all of you guys who are my followers know that I talk all the time about us being in survival mode. Not gonna let up on that because, again, this is a reality for us. So, I want us to think about our parents and what they had to survive through. I think a lot of our parents thought that, meeting our basic needs in terms of food, clothing, and shelter was more than enough, right? Because they didn't have that growing up. So, again, meeting those basic needs was like the best thing since sliced bread, right? We also have to consider the lack of resources that they had in terms of their time and growing up. So appropriate resources allocated in their community was not a thing. Positive examples, again, a lot of the ones that they saw may have been killed or missing, or you know what I mean, just all types of things that happen when Black people are trying to make movements in their life. And mental health was not a thing. We are still in 2021, although you see all these beautiful people on your timeline promoting mental health, there is still a lot of stigma deep in our family systems and in our community. So mental health was definitely not their jam back then, right? So if you don't have any awareness in terms of unhealthy behaviors, you're not going to fix that. You don't even know what that is. You have no level of knowledge or information to identify what that feeling is and how to move and deal with it. So think about how all of those things impacted them as individuals and then was passed down to us as individuals, right? So a lot of my clients ask me, Unique, all right, cool, sounds good. But how do I start this conversation with my parents in regards to knowing their stories? Got you. One of the things that you can do is to first kind of take a step back and think about, well, what may be some of the reasons why they haven't shared these stories with me? With all of the things that I mentioned, there comes a lot of shame, guilt. They may feel like not sharing that information with you was protecting you, denial. There's a lot of reasons as to why these conversations have not been brought to the table. So if you have that understanding or just kind of like that sense that maybe there are deeper reasons as to why they haven't shared this, I think it would, be a good starting point for you in terms of humbling and bringing down, some of the animosity or the confusion or anger that's associated with not knowing these things, right? So when we come to our parents, just letting them know, hey, I'm not here to point fingers or to, point blame at you, but I'm just simply trying to gain understanding and knowledge in terms of who you are as a person. And if all else fails, definitely hitting up those cousins, those aunties, the nieces, you know what I mean? We have those people in our family that hold the skeleton keys, honey. We all know them, right? But definitely going to a reliable source. And some of them may be our patriarchs or matriarchs within our family where we can go to and, really, really gain an assessment and hear the stories that, give you a holistic picture of who your parents are. And again, how the makeup of your family is and or was. And I know another thing too, right? You're asking me, okay, Unique, so what am I doing with this information once I've received it? It's so important that you own your story, right? So just as similar sometimes as our parents and our grandparents, have that shame and guilt, sometimes we carry that, unbeknownst to us. So I'm going to always push for therapy to process, like now that you have all this information, trying to decipher and decode and, really, really figure out what does this mean about your identity and, what does this, again, all mean for you as a person. I learned that, in terms of gaining more information about my parents, including, again, my mom and my father, I gained more compassion for them. Now, don't get it twisted, right? Your experience with them is still your experience. So the hurt, the abandonment, the loss, the grief that may have been tied into this relationship with them is still your truth. But I'm going to, kind of lend this little tip for you is that, forgiveness does not mean acceptance. So although, yes, some of the unhealthy things that were passed down from generation to generation to generation, we understand it, but we're not saying that it was a great thing. And we're also saying that, no, we're not going to accept this and pass this down to, the next generation that comes after us. So it's important, again, your story is your story and it's your truth. And you can own those feelings associated with, again, some of the unhealthy upbringings that you had. For those of us who are continuously met with barriers in regards to, trying to get to the heart of this information, use therapy as a way to, navigate that grief and loss of the unknown, right? And, what does that mean for you, and work through how you're, processing the lack of not having that accessibility to you, okay? All in all, this was just a jumpstart conversation to get you to thinking about how can we break generational traumas if we don't know the ones that are in our backyard. So go ahead. Go and talk to your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your cousins to gain a sense of that history. And if they got a problem with you in terms of asking these questions, tell them I sent you. Until next time. Bye, y'all.